The Total Screen proudly presents their official podcast, On Screen, with your hosts, Tyson Gifford and William Rohrig.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to On Screen, the official podcast of the Total Screen. My name is Tyson.
My name is Will.
And today we've got a few things we're going to be talking about. We're going to be going over some trailers in our On Beat segment. We're going to talk about some stuff coming up on the horizon. And we are going to have the triumphant return of our On Tap segment, which means we're going to be talking about some shows, but we're not going to be talking about them in full spoilers. We're just going to be kind of going over briefly aspects of them. The shows we're going to be talking about this week are House of Ninjas, Avatar: The Last Airbender, the live action one on Netflix, and the recent Shōgun limited series, which just started this week. So let's get started with On the Horizon.
On the horizon.
On the Horizon is where we talk about what's coming up in the next week or so, and we're going to start things off with The Regime, which is a series that stars Kate Winslet as the chancellor of a crumbling autocracy. So she's like the leader of an authoritarian government, and it's falling apart, and it's in the last days of that regime, and this is going to be like a fictional country that this show's about. And Kate Winslet being British, it's going to be like a kind of English-speaking nation rather than defaulting to an otherism. Of like, you know, oh, it's like, it's kind of vaguely Russian or vaguely Asian or something. It's like, no, they're going to do it as if it's like an American or British autocracy that is crumbling.
Right, yeah.
Kind of interesting. Going to be starting up on Sunday, March 3rd on HBO/Max. Then on Wednesday, March 6th, Extraordinary returns for its second season on Hulu. So I watched the first season of this just kind of on a whim. I noticed it when I was scrolling through Hulu one time. It's a British series where pretty much everybody in the world has superpowers, except this one girl doesn't have superpowers. And there's a few other random people that don't have them or that develop them late. They have like support groups for people that aren't developing powers because it's like you're like the one person who doesn't have them, you know, and it's that's basically what the whole series is about. It's kind of a comedy, but yeah, it was a pretty fun series, and it's returning for its second season on Wednesday, March 6th on Hulu. Next up, we have The Gentleman. We're actually going to be talking about the trailer for this, so I won't go into any details about it, but it's a new series based on a Guy Ritchie movie, and Guy Ritchie is involved in the series as well, and that is coming on Thursday, March 7th to Netflix. Then on Friday, March 8th, Damsel comes to Netflix. This is the Millie Bobby Brown starring fantasy movie where she's like given up as a sacrifice to a dragon. And that is coming to Netflix on March 8th. And then lastly, also on Friday, March 8th, Unicorn Overlord is coming to PS4, PS5, Xbox Series X, and Switch. This is the next game from Vanillaware that is being heavily compared to like Fire Emblem and like other kind of tactical strategy games. But it looks great because it's Vanillaware, and all Vanillaware games are absolutely gorgeous.
Oh, yeah. It's a gorgeous game.
And that is coming on Friday, March 8th to PS4, PS5, Xbox Series X, and Switch. That is it for our On the Horizon segment, and now we're going to start up On Beat.
On Beat.
On Beat is our news segment, and we're going to be talking about 4 trailers today for this news segment. And we're going to start things off with The Gentleman, which I just mentioned in the On the Horizon segment because that is coming out on Thursday, March 7th on Netflix. But we got to see a trailer for it now. And like I said, this is based on an existing Guy Ritchie movie of the same name. And Guy Ritchie is involved in the series as well and kind of took like a longer form version of it. And it stars Theo James, who did voice work in the Castlevania series.
There you go. It looks cool, looks fun, looks like a Guy Ritchie production.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, it looks Guy Ritchie. But that was, oddly enough, that was the most normal trailer that we're going to be talking about, because we're going off into the weird now.
Yes.
Because our next trailer is Chicken Nugget, which is a Korean film.
it's a comedy.
Yeah, a very weird comedy in which it appears that a girl is turned into a chicken nugget, and the guy who likes her and I think her father are having to try to deal with that.
Yeah. And they're trying to like save her, and I don't know, all kinds of weirdness happens.
It looks pretty batshit crazy.
Yes, it does. Yeah.
Looks like there's going to be a lot of awkward humor in it and a lot of like kind of, I don't know, like not gross out comedy, but kind of like in that vein, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, weird looking movie. Had to add that to our trailers.
Like a Korean version of a Farrelly Brothers film.
Yeah, pretty much. Then we got a trailer for Boy Kills World. So I've been hearing about this one for a while. It's Bill Skarsgård, Pennywise from the new It movies, and
man, he's done more than that. But yeah,
that's kind of what put him really on the map, I think, though. But
yeah,
actually, he was in a very, very early Netflix series, like when Netflix like didn't have series really. Like I think before Orange Is the New Black and before like House of Cards, maybe even, or like around the time that those like were coming out. He was in a series called Hemlock Grove that was about like werewolves and vampires and stuff.
Oh, I remember hearing about that.
Yeah, that was the first time I'd seen him, but I didn't know he was one of the famous Skarsgårds.
Right.
At the time.
This is a gonzo-looking movie, just like very extreme, about Famke Janssen plays this woman who holds power like over the city or something, and she kills people, like she executes people via like this game show.
It's a little like Running Man, like the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie.
Running Man on drugs.
Yeah, it's like Running Man, but like with a lot of other weird elements to it. And
the main protagonist is the boy in the title, who Jensen's character and like her associates like killed his family and also left him deaf and dumb. Dumb meaning he can't speak.
Yes.
And it's funny because we get a monologue from his inner voice, and his inner voice is H. John Benjamin, which is great.
From Archer and Bob's Burgers and
a
litany of other voice
and
work.
he explains through like his inner monologue that like he got his inner monologue voice from like the last video game he played before the tragedy.
Yeah.
And then it just goes into detail like his plan was to like, Plan 1 was to develop an inner monologue. Plan 2 was to get strong as heck. And Plan 3 was Part 3 was to find a team.
To use to get revenge.
And the whole thing, and it's a revenge, action, comedy, thriller.
With a mute character who has an inner monologue of a different voice.
Again, it's like, I know I already said that, but it's John Wick on crack.
It's like, there's lots of like assorted things that this is referencing. Like the game show element to like the executions is straight up Running Man.
Yes.
The inner monologue from like a death character in kind of an action movie. There was the director Wong Kar-wai is kind of like a famous Chinese director. He did like, In the Mood for Love and some other ones that are like really famous. He did a movie that I really liked in the late 90s called Fallen Angels. And the main character of that, or one of the main characters, because it was kind of an ensemble story, but he was like the main of that group, was like mute, but had like a inner monologue but it was that actor's voice that was doing the monologue, like in his head or whatever, rather than like somebody else doing it. But that, like, it very much feels like that was taken from Fallen Angels, the Wong Kar-wai film. It just feels like there's like, it's assorted references, kind of in the Tarantino sense of like the way Tarantino would make something like Kill Bill, and there's just references to like 1,000 different like Hong Kong action movies in it.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so it's kind of has that kind of a vibe to it. And it definitely also has kind of like a bit of a 70s exploitation kind of vibe. Yeah, I mean, I think this looks excellent. I'm like psyched for this.
Oh yeah, same. This is probably like my favorite trailer this week.
Yeah, I'd agree. And then we got a trailer for the next movie from A24, which is I Saw the TV Glow. And it's starring that dude from Dungeons and Dragons Honor Among Thieves and Detective Pikachu.
Yeah, it stars Justice Smith. I don't really know what to make of this. This is another weird one, and I came out of it, yeah.
Kind of reminds me of is there was a series on Sci-Fi Channel that was like a seasonal anthology series, and I only watched the first season, but that's what it kind of reminds me of, is that first season. And that series, I don't remember what the name of it was, but it was based on like creepypastas, like the stories that were like being put on like Reddit and stuff, like the new age ghost stories or whatever. And it was based on those. And like there was a story about this like children's show that all these kids remember and they all watched it, but like there's no record of it ever existing. And it's just like this creepy kind of thing about that. So that's kind of that kind of a vibe to it, where there's this like show that all these kids watched when they were kids. And it was about like a group of kids getting together to fight against some evil force or something. And it seems like maybe that's real, and that these kids are now being called upon to actually fight something, or like, I don't know. And it looks like it's kind of got like a little bit of a, you know, a hero situation of like these kids now are being enlisted to do this, but there also is kind of like a low-key like horror vibe going on.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It looks really interesting to me.
It does, yeah.
But I can't make heads or tails of it like completely. I can just kind of vaguely guess at what's going on. But, you know, I like stuff like that, so we'll have to see when we hear more about this. Plus, I like kind of weird, long, poetic titles, and I Saw the TV Glow is just a really cool title for a movie, in my opinion. It's not catchy like a simple, you know, title would be, but it just kind of has like a ring to it. I like it. But that is it for our trailer segment, for our On Beat segment. And now we're going to move on to On Tap.
What we've been watching, what we've been playing, what's on tap.
On Tap is a segment we haven't done in a while, and it's kind of like our full spoiler segment, except instead of going into full spoilers and discussing like a whole show or like episode by episode breaking down like the key events and the big spoiler things that happen in it, instead we just kind of give general kind of impressions about some shows that we've been watching. I've watched 3 shows this last week, 3 new shows that I've been watching, and we're going to be talking about all 3 of those. Will watched one of those, and so we're saving that for last because that's the big one of the bunch anyways. But I'm going to start things off with House of Ninjas, which we talked about this before, both on the horizon, but also we did like a trailer for it, or we discussed the news of it, I think. And that's the one that's like, it's a Japanese show, Japanese cast, set in Japan, but it's like oddly, there's like a Westerner that's like the main showrunner of the series. So it's like some guy from like America or something is running this show that's set in Japan in Japanese. Right, yeah. So it's very strange, but it's like, it's interesting watching the show because you can kind of feel a little bit of like Western sensibilities as far as like the structure of the show. Like the way the show is put together and the way there's like certain needle drop moments and the way they use music and certain things in it. It feels very Western as opposed to like if you watched like a Japanese drama or something that was just like straight up made in Japan and had no Western involvement at all. It's got like a different kind of vibe to it a little bit, but it's a fun series about a family of ninjas who stopped practicing their skill set, stopped working for the government. It's like modern, but they stopped serving their role as ninjas and retired from that life because the oldest son of this family died in like their last mission. And so they decided, like mostly the father of the family, the patriarch of the family decided, like, that's it. We're just going to be a normal family from now on. And the younger brother is struggling with some PTSD because he saw his brother get killed by this guy wearing this like demon mask. So he's struggling with that. The sister, his younger sister, is like trying to kind of live out her fantasy of her idealized version of her older brother who was killed. And she's like practicing her skills by like stealing things from museums and then returning them like several days later, like without being caught on either side. So she would steal something and leave a note behind saying, I'll return it in 3 days or something. And then she would return it and both sometimes get away without being caught. And so she's doing that as like a kind of training. And then there's like a younger son who doesn't know anything about the ninja part of the family. He wasn't alive or wasn't old enough when anything went down. So he just doesn't even know that his family is a bunch of ninjas. And then, of course, the patriarch is working in a brewery that was like the cover for the family before, and now it's like his actual business. And there's a mother and a grandmother, and they're all ninjas, his whole family. But it's just interesting. It's about, they think that the world of ninjas is over. Like, they were the last ninja clan. They took out the other one that was around at the time. But now there's like ninjas showing up again. There's some kind of like a new age religion that's got like this kind of cult-like mentality going on in Japan that's also tied into whatever's going on. And then there's like the government agents that are basically trying to get this family to get back into being ninjas to investigate these issues. And it's just like a bunch of different stories. Like all these characters have their own little stories within the bigger events that are happening. And it's a pretty like interesting drama series.
Yeah, sounds interesting for sure.
Yeah, it's fun, but it's got like lots of different things going on, and it's got trauma kind of at the core with the oldest son being killed. And
yeah.
What that means. But yeah, so House of Ninjas, recommended. It is on Netflix. It is subtitled in Japanese, and yeah, check that out. Then I've also been watching, and with all of these shows, it's only the first 2 episodes. There's only 2 episodes out of Shōgun so far, and House of Ninja and Avatar are both, the full seasons are out, but I've only seen like the first 2, so that's all I'm talking about here.
Okay.
Avatar: The Last Airbender, huge series, a lot of people talking about it.
Can't remember if you saw the original, the cartoon or not.
I have not. Okay. I have not seen it.
So this is going to be the view of an outsider to the franchise.
I was always very skeptical of the series. I would hear so many people talking the cartoon up so much. And I don't know, something about it just rubbed me the wrong way. It might have to do with the fan base and the whole kind of conceit of like calling it an anime, even though it's not from Japan, and like saying like a lot of the people that were really praising it were going like, this is the best anime in years. And then you'd ask them like what other anime they've seen, and they hadn't seen anything since like Dragon Ball Z.
Right.
And it's like, yeah, you're not really an anime watcher. So it's kind of weird for you to be saying that, you know? So I've always had this very like kind of defiant attitude towards it. Like I never wanted to watch it because it just, all the stuff around it pissed me off basically. Like the attitudes of people around it and stuff. So I just kind of like, I wasn't like going around talking shit about it or anything, but I just wasn't going to watch it. But it got the live action treatment, and it looked like a really high budget live action show that was done kind of in the vein of like what they did with One Piece. And I said, you know what? I'm just going to check this out. I'm going to see what all the hype is about. And then I'm also going to like, you know, look at a few impressions and see from people that actually like the cartoon if they think it's a good adaptation. As far as that goes, from what I've been hearing, there are a few things that were changed. I don't really know. I can't really go into specifics on them because I don't really know the difference because I never watched the cartoon. But it seems there were a few things that changed that pissed some people off. And I think most people really liked like the first episode and thought they nailed the tone. And then after there, it kind of became a split where some people liked the series as it continued on and some people got pissed off because of changes that were made. So I can't really speak too much about that since I didn't watch the original cartoon, but it's interesting to kind of see like a divided reaction like that, as opposed to say like the adaptation of Cowboy Bebop, which was almost entirely negative, or the adaptation of One Piece, which was overwhelmingly positive. This is kind of like between those, it seems.
Yeah, from what I was like looking at the reactions, the general impression I got reading around was that it's not an amazing adaptation, but it's not as bad as it could be.
Yeah, and probably better than the movie.
Yes, definitely better than the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, as far as the actual show goes, I don't know, I'm gonna keep watching it. It's entertaining enough. There are a few things that I think are kind of corny about it. It's the same stuff that like I saw from clips of the cartoon that made me not want to watch it either. So I don't know how much is just my own bias affecting me on it, but I'm going to keep watching it. There's enough good in it to make it entertaining to watch, but there's also some stuff that just feels a little cheesy and not like, you know, I mean, One Piece is a little cheesy too when you watch the live action one and stuff, but it's so inventive and fun and charismatic. The characters are so charismatic and so well cast that I think that does so much heavy lifting to make make it work in that format where like I said before, like One Piece is the kind of thing that you can't really imagine working properly if you just watch the anime. It's like, how would this ever work in live action? And they kind of did it not perfectly, but they did enough things right that it made it work. And Avatar: The Last Airbender, I'm kind of feeling like the same kind of cheesy elements that I felt kind of in One Piece, but I'm not really being drawn in the same way I was with One Piece. But it's still okay. I guess that's the best thing I can say about it. So I'll keep watching it. Maybe I'll check back in maybe after I finish it and let you know what I think about the season as a whole. But 2 episodes in, at least it ended with, there have been at least 2 Lost alum in it so far.
Yeah.
Which was cool.
Nice. Which was cool.
Yeah, the one, the Miles is in it, the guy who sees ghosts.
Yes.
And the second episode ended with, Jin from Lost.
Oh.
Who is the main villain, I think.
He's the main villain. Yeah, he's the leader of the fire, the fire flame.
Yeah, and Miles is also a member of the Fire Country or whatever, but he's like a different person. He's like a much lower ranked person. But
right.
Yeah, so like 2 Lost alums, like that's cool.
Yeah, that's always awesome, seeing people from Lost and stuff.
Yep. Speaking of seeing people from Lost and stuff.
Yes, that was exactly going to be like the segue.
First 2 episodes of Shōgun. So this is one that you watched as well.
Yes.
This is one that was getting glowing praise. A lot of people saying, comparing it to like Game of Thrones, not in the sense of like it being fantasy, but in the sense of it being like really high production value, right. Political intrigue, all these different dynasties facing off against each other, all these different factions and all the machinations behind the scenes.
Yep.
What did you think of Shōgun?
Of war. I thought it was excellent. Well, I mean, only 2 episodes came out. So, so far, based on the first 2 episodes, is excellent.
Do you have any experience with the original miniseries or the book?
No.
Okay. I watched the original miniseries, but it was so long ago that I just remember like maybe 2 or 3 scenes, and they were all like scenes that we saw in the first episode. Like I remember the guy being boiled alive. I remember that from the original Shōgun miniseries, and then it happened in the first episode here. And I remember just kind of the idea of this guy that's like an outsider that had like an issue with like a language barrier and couldn't properly communicate with the people. And I remember something, and this might not be that accurate of memory because my memories of it are pretty vague, of what I ended up seeing and really liking in this series, which is that you have these 2 sides both calling each other barbarians, but in different languages that they can't understand. And it's kind of fascinating when you have like this, you know, you'll see the Japanese group of people and they're like, oh, this fucking barbarian, you know, and stuff like that. And then the guy's like, how can you treat your guests like this, you fucking barbarians, you know? And it's this idea of like, you know, they're saying the same thing about each other because they don't understand each other, literally don't understand each other.
And I really love the other wrinkle of John Blackthorne being like the only Brit on the island, and the only people that can translate for him are the Portuguese, who freaking hate the British. So they're all his enemies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like they're not necessarily accurately translating for him. One of them does, but
yeah, one of them does, because one of them, like the one guy, the monk, I guess, he actually has like some honor to him, you know?
Yeah. And he's also in a situation, I like that they played it this way, that he's also in a situation where there's somebody else that understands Portuguese and Japanese that's in the room with him when he's doing the translation, but they never played it off as if that's why he's doing it accurately.
That's like, true,
they never played it off like he was being deceitful, which I thought was like, that was kind of a cool touch, you know, because you could have easily just gone like, oh, he has to translate accurately, because if he doesn't, he's in deep shit, because there's somebody else that can notice that. But they're not even playing into that angle at all, which I like.
Yeah, which I like that too. It's funny because, like, the one Portuguese sailor that he runs into is played by Nestor Carbonell from Lost, one of like the most recognizable people from Lost. And obviously the guy playing Toranga is Hiroyuki Sanada, and he also had a small role in the last season of Lost.
Yeah, a small but integral role. He was an important figure.
He was.
I think his character's name was Dogen or something.
Yeah,
like
Dogen.
That. Yeah, Dogen. Yeah,
in the final season.
In the final season of Lost. He's a fascinating actor. I love this guy whenever he shows up in pretty much anything. He's got such a presence to him. And I think I first saw him in The Last Samurai, the Tom Cruise movie, which introduced a bunch of Japanese actors that were kind of lesser known to like.
Sonata, like, he shows up in a lot of places. Like, I remember, like, he was in Westworld.
Yep.
Yeah.
They did their samurai world and you had to have Sonata because he's like the perfect samurai, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
He was in John Wick 4 as well. So you haven't seen that one yet, but you've seen the trailers and seen pictures of him in it and stuff. But yeah, he shows up in a bunch of stuff. He was also, there was a show, a kind of a mystery show, I think, that was on Sci-Fi Channel called Helix, and he was in that as well. So he's been in quite a bit of Western production since he broke out with The Last Samurai. That kind of like made Western people know who he was. And then all of a sudden he was like, every time they needed a samurai or like a real kind of stoic Japanese figure, it's like, call him Sonata.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
There's also, I wanted to point out, he's not one of the main characters, but I wrote the actor's name down and the character's name down because I think he's one of the more fascinating characters in this, which is the character of Kashigi Yabushige, who is played by Tadanobu Asano. And you'd recognize him as Hogun in the Thor movies. So Thor had his Thor in the Thor movies. He had his merry band, his like group of warriors.
Oh
that were with him, and the one guy who was like Japanese. That's Hogun from the Thor movies, and he was killed by Hela in Ragnarok, and that's that actor. The character I'm speaking of is the one he's kind of like obsessed with death. He's the guy who kind of first takes ownership of John Blackthorne. And he's the guy that boils the guy alive and is like listening to him being killed.
Yeah.
And obsessed with it and stuff.
He's a really interesting character.
He's just a really weird duck. An odd duck, you know? He's just weird and it plays in the thing. I think is also interesting is the actor kind of looks like, but also his performance is kind of erratic in the same way as like Toshiro Mifune, who is was, I guess before Sonata, he was like way back before Sonata. He was the go-to Japanese guy for anything. He was originally supposed to be Mr. Miyagi in The Karate Kid too.
Mifune. Interesting. Okay.
But he couldn't speak any English, so that was part of why he didn't work out.
Didn't work out, yeah.
But Toshiro Mifune, frequent collaborator of Akira Kurosawa. You know, he was in The Seven Samurai. He was in all the Yojimbo, all the big Kurosawa movies. I don't think he was in Akira, which we talked about on this podcast before, but all the samurai epics, basically, that Kurosawa did. He was kind of like the main guy or one of the main guys in all of those. And I just thought it was kind of interesting because Toshiro Mifune was in the original Shōgun miniseries. He played the part that Sonata plays in this one.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
But I thought his character, having seen that actor in several Kurosawa films and a few other things, like so reminded me of the performance that Tadanobu Asano does in this as that one guy who's obsessed with death. He's kind of like a little bit Weasley and you don't really know what side he's on. It seems like he's kind of going against Toranaga, but it almost seems like maybe he's not. Like, I don't know. There's like all sorts of stuff going on with his character. He's interesting. You know what he kind of reminds me of? Is Asher from Spartacus.
Oh, yeah.
He's kind of an Asher-esque character. And you probably would say that Asher was probably took inspiration from maybe the original Shōgun miniseries. You know, maybe that's why.
It's possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I wanted to kind of highlight him a little bit because I thought it was interesting.
He's great in this. Oh, yeah. He's like one of my favorite characters in this so far. Even though like he doesn't have like the biggest part. Like he is like one of the standout characters in the show so far.
Yeah, there's kind of like three main characters in the show. And then there's this guy is kind of like part of the secondary cast, I guess. And he's kind of at the top of that, or towards the top of that as far as like being an interesting character. The main characters, as we mentioned, Hiroyuki Sanada's Toranaga character.
Yes.
He is this guy who he's like a daimyo. He's a warlord. He owns a fiefdom. He has like a certain control of a certain section of land, and he served under the Taiko, who was died a year before the events of the series.
Yeah,
and
the current situation is that he's in like a peaceful co-regency with the other daimyo. I guess
there's 5 of them.
Yes.
But they want to I think they were saying impeach. Is that what they were saying? That they were on to do
impeach.
With the intention of killing, basically.
Yeah, impeach means killing.
Yeah.
You know, yeah. They want to impeach him and remove him from the equation.
Yeah, they want to get rid of him. It's scheming and backstabbing from the other characters that are involved in this. He seems to be the most level-headed character, so of course he's the one that they want to get rid of because he's got power and he's got respect and standing.
And he knows this. He knows they're scheming to get rid of him, you know. So he's trying.
He's playing a smart, but like a less Weasley, more honorable game against them as well.
Yeah, exactly. He's trying to turn the tables on them.
And then we have the character of John Blackthorne, or as they always call him, Anjin, which means pirate.
Yes.
He is the only British character there, except for, I guess there's some members of his crew maybe, but I think they were mostly a Dutch crew.
Yeah, I think so too.
But he arrives in Japan, half starved to death, with his crew that are like, you know, malnourished and have scurvy, and they've made this really hard journey, basically trying to find Japan as like a trade partner, possibly. That's what it seems to be. There seems to be some other machinations going on behind that as well. But as far as the crew of his ship is concerned, they're like, I guess, pirates that wanted to open up trade channels with Japan, because Japan's been trading exclusively with Portugal.
Yeah.
And Portugal's the only one that knows how to get to Japan, basically. But he sets foot on Japanese soil and becomes the first Brit to do so.
Yeah, and his presence there threatens the Portuguese there.
Yeah.
You know.
They hate him both because they know who he is, he's a pirate, but also because there's a war between Portugal and England at the time.
Yeah. Yes.
So that's his character. I think he's great. I don't really have experience with his actor, Cosmo Jarvis, who plays him, but he does a great job. He's very charismatic. He's very interesting. He's got a great voice. He's fun to watch to see what he's going to be getting up to.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And then the last main character is Toda Mariko, played by Anna Sawai, who was recently in the Monarch Legacy of Monster series on Apple TV Plus, which I have not watched, so I don't really have any experience with this actress. But her character, she is an interpreter, kind of. She's learning Portuguese and Latin, I guess, as well. They referenced in the second episode briefly. She has been studying from the Portuguese people in Japan, but the priest, for example, that we had mentioned earlier, but she's also taken on their religion. She's a convert to Catholicism. And it's interesting because we're very well aware of like Catholicism and Protestants and these different sects of Christianity, but it's a plot point in the series that the Japanese have no idea what any of that is.
Yeah.
They know what Catholicism is because of the influence of the Portugal. On the
Portuguese
country.
have been pushing it. It's funny because, they don't know what Protestantism is. They don't know, like, there was a schism that occurred within Christianity, you know?
They don't get any of the politics. So for them, it's like, they have trouble understanding why Blackthorne is so against or opposed to the people from Portugal and why the people from Portugal hate him so much. It's kind of like shocking to them, like they don't understand it. And it's like you mentioned, John Blackthorne has to rely on them to translate for him. And in doing so, they're like not necessarily translating things accurately. They're basically saying he's a pirate and needs to be killed and not really actually translating for him, like he said, except for the one.
The first translator he got was basically trying to get him killed as fast as possible.
Yeah. So, like, you know, he's having to, like, figure out that this guy isn't accurately translating for him, which he suspects because he's from Portugal, so he just suspects, like, of course he's gonna lie and try to get me killed. And so he's, like, hearing this guy translate for him and trying to say, he doesn't speak for me, but of course nobody can understand what he's saying when he says that. So he's having to find ways to show that, which I thought was, like, really clever and cool the way they did it. Like ripping off the guy's rosary and throwing it on the ground, showing disdain for the Catholic Church.
Yeah,
as a way of showing I am not the same as them. And like the way it, like that some of the Japanese people pick up on that and some of them do not.
Yeah.
Is like interesting, and like how they react to it is interesting. So a lot of the show so far, what's been so interesting is just the language barrier.
Yeah.
It's a show about a language barrier and about the political machinations that want to keep that language barrier in place.
And I also appreciate that all the dialogue spoken in Japanese by Japanese is in Japanese with English subtitles, you know?
It is kind of weird that they do that though, because when their characters are speaking in English, it's supposed to be Portuguese.
Yeah.
It's not English. It's kind of a weird touch.
Yeah, it is a weird touch. Like, I kind of wish it was consistent in that way, where they had the characters speaking Portuguese actually speak Portuguese, but yeah.
I think they just wanted to have the parts be in English, you know?
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah.
But they weren't going to do that with the Japanese, you know? So they settled for doing it with the Portuguese aspects of it. So the show could still be somewhat of an English language series.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, I mean, it's just a really good show. It's really fascinating. Like we mentioned, all the stuff with the language barrier and the religious divide between the Protestants and the Catholics and the kind of outside perspective view of that from the Japanese. And then you have, of course, the aspects of Japanese culture that are completely not understood by John Blackthorne as a character. And he sees them as like savages. And, you know, there's one of the Portuguese characters like points out to him, like, you think that we sit at the height of like civilization or something, but here we're pulling into Osaka. Look at the city.
Yeah.
Like, they have civilization too. Like, they're a civilized nation as well. And there's things about their culture that are more civilized than ours. And, you know, like, you might see some of their acts of barbarism and think it's brutal and they're barbarians and stuff, but they also have culture. It's just different.
Yeah, exactly.
You're barbarous in your own ways, kind of thing. So that was a big part of the original Shōgun miniseries that I do remember, was that it was about that. It was about that cultural difference. It was that the whole show was about that. It was about how people can understand each other when they're from these, you know, alien countries or these alien worlds, essentially, you know, where they had no communication with the outside world. Like, Japan doesn't know anything about England. When Blackthorne arrives and starts talking to him, they're like, "What country are you from?" And he's like, "England." And they're like, "What's that?"
Yeah. They just assume he's Portuguese, like, the moment they see him.
Yeah, because all foreigners are Portuguese, you know, or like, that's all they've had experience with. So they don't understand that. They know foreigners from their region. So they know they've mentioned Korea and they mentioned China.
Yeah.
In the series, you know, as being countries that they've dealt with and stuff. But they don't have any dealings with the West.
Yeah, exactly. They've been pretty much isolated from the West for the most part.
Yeah. Japan is a country that went through a long stretch of isolationism where they locked themselves away from other countries, and they opened up trade with Portugal and were allowing, you know, Portugal to trade with them for a while. And this is kind of like about how other foreign influences start affecting Japan.
And yeah, Portugal was only able to open up trade with them because they can't trade with their neighbors because, you know, they kind of went and pissed off Korea and China, you know, by trying to like invade them.
Yes. So it's just, it's a really interesting series. It's got a lot going on story-wise. I like that they've kind of played down some of the aspects that are kind of criticized now, looking back, about the original Shōgun miniseries, is that it was very much in the vein of like a white savior story.
Yeah.
And that is not really in place here. Like, they're not playing these Japanese characters as being like lesser than this other character. They're playing them all as having like their own motivations and their own kind of ideas and their own strategies, and they're all like hyper intelligent, basically.
Oh yeah.
So I wanted to go a little bit in on some of the stuff, background about the series, the original series, the book, and the history and how it's tied to it. So this is a fictitious story.
This is all going to be new to me, so go ahead.
This is a fictitious story. These characters are not real characters. They're not real people from history, but they're heavily based on real figures from history. Toranaga, which is Sonata's character, is based on Tokugawa Ieyasu.
Okay.
I'm pronouncing that wrong. Who was a shogun in Japan. Blackthorne is based on William Adams, who is a famous British person who ended up serving under Tokugawa in Japan. There's also this story. The entire story is basically about the founding of the Tokugawa shogunate, which lasted for over 200 years. And like, it ended in the late 1800s. And at that time, there was like a whole other story. I put this in my notes. It's unrelated to anything that's happening in Shōgun, but it's almost like it would make a good sequel series if they were to ever do it. Is that there is a figure that's very well known, an American figure that I think most people in America have no idea about. out, but pretty much everybody in Japan knows the name of. And that's Matthew C. Perry. And he was like a general or an admiral, I think, of the United States Navy. And he basically forced Japan to open up their borders when they were still closed in the late 1800s. He used a show of strength to force trade with Japan. And the reason I bring all of this up in this character is that there's striking parallels to like the idea of a person from another country like forcing trade with Japan, you know? And like here you're kind of seeing it from a different angle where it's not being forced on Japan, but there is clearly some manipulations and machinations going on to ensure that trade's happening between Portugal and Japan. And now you have this player coming in from England that's trying to establish his own method. And all of this is based on real stories. The characters are different, but the names are different, but it's all based on real stories of the founding of the Tokugawa shogunate. But it's just similar that it ties into that. I also wanted to bring up, they mention in this series, and we meet the character once in a flashback, a character called the Taiko.
Yes.
That's a title. And, the title of Taiko, it basically means that it's like a regent who's like retired, basically, from that position of power. So the Taiko that they're referring to, he goes by a different name because all the characters have different names in this series, but the historical figure it's based on is a guy named Toyotomi Hideyoshi, who's a very, very famous, just like Tokugawa is very, very famous, shogun in Japanese history, and he is also the direct follow-up to probably the most famous shogun of all time, Oda Nobunaga, who, if you've played Japanese video games, I'm sure you've heard the name Oda Nobunaga.
There's an entire video game series, Noabunga's Ambition.
Yeah, Nobunaga's Ambition. Yeah, it's
from Toei, actually. Yeah, they make all kinds of strategy games based off of like Japanese history and also Chinese history.
Yeah, there's like it's not even just that though. There's like he's referenced in lots of other games. He's referenced in a ton of different animes and other things that aren't even necessarily about him, but he's just referenced in them. Or like be a character in modern day Japan, and he like is talking to some old guy, and the old guy is supposed to be the reincarnation of Oda Nobunaga. It's like that. He's just an incredibly famous figure in Japanese history.
Oh yeah,
but in
Pokemon Conquest. Nobunaga fielded a team of Hydreigon, Zekrom, and Rayquaza, so he was not to be messed with.
Very, very famous figure, and he's kind of 2 generations behind what's happening here. He was killed, and then Hideyoshi avenged his death, and Hideyoshi is basically the Taiko that we saw the one flashback. We saw him basically on his deathbed when he was a very old man. That was basically Hideyoshi. It goes by a different name in the series, but that's who it's referencing. So yeah, it's fiction. This whole series is fiction, but it's heavily, heavily based on the founding of the Tokugawa shogunate. They changed the names of all the characters to give them creative leeway so that they could make changes, do things to the characters without really falling under harsh criticism for how they interpret certain people, like historical figures,
Right, yeah, exactly.
This was all, the original miniseries, and this miniseries is based on a book by James Clavell, also called Shōgun, that came out in 1975. The miniseries came out in 1980, and now we have this series in 2024. So that's kind of what I wanted to kind of touch on those details, but we've kind of gone through that now. I'm excited for more of this. I think it's a really fascinating show. I'm going to be watching it week to week, frustratingly, because that's the only way the show is available, is week to week.
Yeah, it's going to be, they dropped the 2 episodes for premiere, and now it's going to be like week to week. Because it is a basic cable television show, which I was kind of shocked to see nudity in a basic cable television show.
I've seen this a number of times now. I can't remember the exact ones where I've seen it, but there have been a number of them where I've seen them, and I'm not sure if that nudity was shown in the broadcast.
Okay, yeah.
Because I know there was one show I saw where it had nudity, and I was like, whoa, wait, this is like this is a basic cable show. How is it having nudity?
Yeah, it's like, this is on FX. I'm like,
yeah, and then I
they just
found out
showed
like,
bare
oh,
breasts,
the version
you
they
know?
showed on Hulu had nudity, but the version that was shown on FX did not.
Interesting. I didn't even know that was a thing, that there was like
Yeah.
uncensored versions being run on Hulu.
Yeah, that's like, it's like a relatively new thing, and I think Hulu might be like the only player that's really involved in that so far.
Oh, okay.
Because, HBO, Max, they have
Yeah.
nudity regardless. You
Yeah,
know?
yeah,
It's not a big
'cause
deal to them.
they're premium pay cable, so they get away
Yeah.
with that. But
And none of the other ones have a
yeah.
direct parallel. Like, I mean, Paramount
Yeah.
Plus, maybe, for all we know, maybe like Yellowstone or something. And that's on like Paramount Plus, isn't it? Or is it? I don't know.
yeah, it's
Maybe one of
Paramount.
those shows has like nudity in it, but doesn't have it on whatever other channel it airs on. I don't know. I don't know, but I
Never
have
watched
seen it. I have seen it with other Hulu shows. I just don't remember which ones they were, but I remember it being a kind of striking moment of like, whoa, wait a minute, you know?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
But I mean, they were even able to show nudity on some basic cable channels too. Like they showed the South Park movie uncut on Comedy Central, like at like 1 a.m.
Oh, okay.
They would
Yeah,
air that
probably.
movie and they'd air it uncut, and it's animated, but there's still like nudity and stuff that wouldn't have been shown, on regular basic cable.
Right,
hours.
right.
But they still showed it, but they just didn't do it until like 1 a.m. or something. Cable has weird rules.
Yes, it does.
I don't think there's really any rules that stops them from doing anything, actually.
No,
on cable. It's more like self-censorship for the
it's
sake of keeping things that way.
because I think the deal with basic cable is that they still rely on advertising. Because it's like, it's free with your cable subscription, right? So they're getting paid by, the carriage fee from the cable company. And so they rely on advertisers for most of their revenue, just like network does.
The difference being that network is broadcast. So they have government mandates not to
they
show
have
certain
government.
things.
Yes, but basic cable is like they're beholden to the advertisers, and they don't want to do anything that's going to make advertisers uncomfortable. Whereas HBO, Showtime, and that they're commercial free. They get their money
They're only beholden to their subscribers.
Yeah, they're beholden to their subscribers, so they can show nudity, whatever, all day long. They don't care.
Yeah, as can like certain streaming services like Netflix, for example.
Yes.
Now Netflix has advertisers, but before they didn't.
Yeah, before they didn't. Yeah, exactly. And I think that was the thing. So
it's that, but I think there's also somewhat similar to the MPAA situation, which the MPAA, or the Motion Picture Association of America, they're the ones that give ratings to movies in movie theaters, like R and PG-13 and stuff like that. And it's self-regulation. It's an industry-owned organization that does that.
Yeah.
It's not a government, like the ratings like R and PG-13, those aren't government ratings. That's like done by the industry itself. And the reason they do that is basically to keep the government off their ass. Because if they didn't do it, the government was going to do it. And so that was the compromise that was met. So I think there might be a little bit of that too, of the sense that cable could come under fire from the government. It could come under some regulation of the government, but it isn't. Because it's not broadcast, it isn't under regulation of government. And I think they just behave in a way just to kind of keep that, keep the status quo intact so that they don't have to be regulated by the government.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's all I have to say.
Yeah. Oh, I just thought of another one with as far as censorship goes, that where something aired uncensored on a basic cable channel. MTV, the Prodigy video, Smack My Bitch Up.
Oh, okay. I've never seen that.
It was really famous when it happened. It was a big deal that they had this video and there was like big controversy about the song and the video.
Yeah.
And then they said that they originally decided they were not going to play the video. And then they said that they would play it, but they would only play it like in a certain block late at night. And it was uncensored. They said they'd show it, and they'd show it uncensored, and it had nudity in it. So that's another example. I think that's probably the first example I can think of where they did that, where a basic cable channel showed nudity.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, that was a little bit of a weird tangent we went off on, but
uh-huh.
all related. It's all related. Yeah, so Shōgun, good show, incredible production values. I had one complaint about it, I think, and that is that there is a certain stylistic effect that you can do when you're filming with a camera that I am not very fond of, and it does it quite a bit in the first episode. I didn't notice notice it as much in the second episode. But it's basically shooting very wide angle to the point where it's almost like a fisheye lens. And then leaning into that, like using that kind of like warped, like the way that things are kind of bent because it's kind of almost fisheye, and like leaning into that with the way the shots are composed to kind of like play into that. It's not a look I'm really fond of. And that was one thing that kind of bothered me in the first episode. There were like several moments where it was a little annoying to me. And then in the second episode, I just didn't even notice it at all. Like if it was there, it just didn't stand out to me.
Right.
So that's my one complaint I'll have, just like a little production thing. But yeah, that's it for our On Tap segment. And I'm just going to bring up one more thing to end up the show, and it's a sad note, and that's why I'm putting it at the very end of the episode. We lost a legendary comedian just today. We record on Wednesday, so this is on February 28th, and we lost Richard Lewis, who was the prince in Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. Men in Tights. It was Robin Hood Men in Tights that he was in Prince of Thieves.
Men in Tights.
It was spoofing comedian. Prince of Thieves. Yeah, but legendary comedian. He's got an incredibly iconic presence and a look that just, you instantly recognize him. I actually remember a funny story about this is that I saw him in a Bristol Farms, which is like a grocery store in Fairfax, which is downtown LA area or like around Los Angeles area. And I was in the store and I saw him talking to somebody and just immediately recognize him because he's so iconic looking. You can't mistake him for anybody else. That's Richard Lewis. It was like, I'm kind of like, oh wow, that's crazy. And he was like really animated when he was talking to this employee, and they were like laughing and having a good time. So I'm like, I'm not going to like go over there and bother him just so I can like be some fan or something that, you know, is annoying. So I'm like, but that's just kind of a cool moment, you know, to see somebody that's just very iconic like that. When I got out of there, I couldn't remember his name. And my mom didn't see him. She was with me, but she didn't like see him. And I pointed him out when he was leaving the Bristol Farms when we were getting in the car and he was leaving. And I'm like, that's the guy I was talking about.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I couldn't remember his name. And I had my phone on me and I grabbed it and I just literally typed in neurotic comedian. And first thing that popped up was Richard Lewis.
Right. Yeah.
That's how iconic he is. That you can just literally type in his style of comedy and he's the only thing that really pops up. Because you think of neurotic comedian, who do you think of? Richard Lewis. He is the neurotic comedian. For some reason, his name just wasn't coming to my mind in that moment. And I'm like, I know who it is. I just can't, who is it? And I looked it up and by typing in neurotic comedian, and it's the first name that came up. So that's kind of, I think, impressive if you think about it. That like, you could be so synonymous with a style of what you do that just the general search of that style immediately brings you up as the top search result.
That's what makes you a legend.
Yeah. It's really sad, but we have lost Richard Lewis. He's been having some health issues. He was diagnosed with Parkinson's. He's had some other health issues related to that. I believe he also struggled through cancer several years ago, but he ended up passing away from a heart attack. It's going to be hard because I'm watching Curb Your Enthusiasm, but I've only seen the first episode of the new season so far. And he's in it because he and Larry David in real life are really good friends. And he plays a kind of fictionalized version of himself in Curb Your Enthusiasm. And I know he's in the last season. And in his role in the last season is basically talking about how he's going to die, that his character is sick and is dying. And it's going to be really hard to watch those episodes now, knowing that he's passed away.
Right. Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
But that's it. Just wanted to send out, for Richard Lewis, R.I.P.
Mm-hmm.
Again, as is kind of our new tradition, we don't have a topic for next week, but we'll find one when we get there. So thank you everybody for listening. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm at Tyson Gifford. You can follow Will. He is at Voxel Hero. You can check out our website, thetotalscreen.com. If you go to our website and open up the container story for any of our podcast episodes, scroll down to that bottom paragraph. You'll see all of the relevant links to our SoundCloud page, our RSS feed. Everything's there that you need, as well as our social accounts and stuff. So check all of that out there. You can also subscribe to our podcast through your favorite podcast client of choice like Apple Podcast and Pocket Cast, and the entire backlog of our podcast is available on our YouTube channel, as well as other content, including the 300 episodes of our old podcast that we did called The Weekly Set at the time. So you can check that out as well. But thank you everybody for listening. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you for listening to the OnScreen podcast, the official podcast of The Total Screen. visit our website at thetotalscreen.com. This podcast can be found on any major podcast client, including Pocket Cast and Apple Podcast. The entire backlog of this podcast and other content can be found on our YouTube channel.